So today I'm actually here to talk about side projects and in particular with relation to startups. When Sebastian and the team asked me if I would speak here at RubyConf, my first thing was like, you do know I don't know any Ruby, right? Apparently that is okay for me to come and address you guys because I know PHP. I'm kidding, I don't even know PHP. But since I don't know Ruby, I was like, okay, I guess I need to have a slide to establish some credibility. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Envato. And we have something like 33 million visitors every month to our sites. And we have 250 people working at Envato, including lots of Ruby devs, many of whom are here in this audience, whom I will try not to embarrass by, like when your mom shows up at school and you're like, maybe I'll try to be the cool mom. Mass resignations ensue. We have 250 people who work at Envato. We paid out $250 million to our community, and we're bootstrapped, which is kind of cool, but nothing to do with what I'm here to talk to you about today, because what I actually want to talk about is not the part of startups that's when they get successful, but more about how you get to a startup. So the stuff you can do on your travels towards a startup. So, in my experience, startups are hard. Like they're not easy things. They're kind of glamorous these days. You've all seen The Social Network and that poor HBO show. But side projects are difficult. Startups, rather, are difficult. For me, I've been running a startup now for almost 10 years, and it's been easily the hardest thing I've ever worked on, like a massive learning curve upwards. But side projects, on the other hand, are a little easier. The incline's a little less. So where a startup is high risk, typically, you've put lots of savings in, you've maybe quit your job, maybe you've put somebody else's savings in, it's high pressure, it's high reward, but it's high risk, high pressure, and it's a bit of a marathon. Whereas a side project is usually pretty low risk, no one really cares, you haven't put a lot of your energy or time into it, hopefully. It's low pressure, low risk, and generally speaking, a labor of love. But where these two things meet is that for me, side projects are a great way to train towards a startup. So it's like the startup gym, if you like, is side projects. Not that all side projects lead to this, but if you're interested in getting into startups, for me, side projects are a great place to start. And it's because they share a lot of the same sorts of things. And the reason I think it's important to train up to these things is, like to give you an example, let's say after this talk, at the coffee break, I walk up to you and I'm like, hey, I'm Collis. I'm like a guy who doesn't know any Ruby. I don't know anything about development, but I've decided I want to become a developer. And you'd be like, oh, cool, that's awesome. So like, what are you going to do? And like a Code Academy course or something? And I'd be like, no, I've decided I'm just going to jump right into a project. And the project I've picked is I'm going to build an air traffic control system. And I've decided to put some like real planes with real people because, I'm an entrepreneur. We do that crazy stuff. We're going to make real people fly through my air traffic control system, and I'm going to learn everything from the ground up along the way as I go. I'll just pick it up. Don't worry. It'll be cool. And also, by the way, if it doesn't go well, I will take that to mean that I shouldn't be a developer. I will take this as a personal failure that I should not be a developer. You'd be like, dude, you're an idiot. Like a dashing, good-looking idiot. But an idiot. Why would you start there? You should start with small stuff. Do some Hello Worlds or something first. Pair and do other things before you get there. It's the same in startups, but I've met so many people who've gone, I'm just going to jump straight into a huge startup, and then I'm going to put everything in, I'm going to put my savings in, and I'm going to just go for it. And if it doesn't work out, I've met people on the other side who are like, yeah, guess I'm just not cut out for startups. Like, no, that's not true. You just need to build up to it. Don't walk into the gym and pick up the heaviest weight. Just do some dumbbells. That's how I exercise, by the way. These are 20 kilos each. Anyways, here's a list of some stuff you're going to do in a startup, right? So when you want to start a startup, you're going to have to figure out what's the idea behind this startup. You're probably going to have to make something. You're going to have to collaborate with some people. You're going to have to launch it. You'll probably want to market it, monetize it. You're going to have to get some capital. You're going to have to see it through. And there's probably 1,000 things in between these. But these are some of the big pieces of a startup. Now, most of you guys are Ruby devs, working as Ruby devs. In a typical dev job, you're probably really classically in these two fields. You're making stuff, you're collaborating, but probably in a typical dev job, you're not busy coming up with business ideas or raising capital. So it makes sense that these are some things you need to practice. You don't just know these things. Nobody pops out at birth with like a monetization skill set. That just doesn't happen. Not like, hey, this hospital could do with some. The stuff you do in a side project is like things that will get you on your path towards a startup. So you might be real comfortable with 2 of them. You start doing side projects, you're going to have some attempts to come up with ideas, try out different things, you're going to have to launch the things, you're going to have to see them through. But importantly, you don't need to do lots of marketing, you don't need to do lots of monetization, you don't need to raise capital, and there's lots of things from a startup that you don't need to do. So it's somewhere in between. Not only that, the more side projects you do, the more you can practice some of those extra skill sets. So maybe on your first side project you don't do much of them, and a little later you start doing a few more of those bits. So here's a couple of people who do side projects. Some guy you've probably never heard of. Great dress sense. Nobody gave me that memo. Desk Near Me was one of Keith's early side projects. Through a Rails Rumble, I think a few of the other devs who worked on it are here, and that turned into a thing, and it got sold. But it was just meant to be a little project from an event. A little later, Keith with Mario worked on Desktopper and GiftTopper. I emailed Keith to ask him about some of these side projects, and he was like, well, 30,000 users, $0 in marketing, drops mic in email form. It was a great example, though, of a side project where he got to experiment with how to spread stuff, like how to get it out there, without a lot of risk, without a lot of pressure. Probably not a great like startup idea that needs millions of dollars, but a cool little side project. A little later, he started a side project while working in Envato, which many of you know because he keeps talking about it constantly in his intro, Build Kite or Build Box, which is a really cool set of tools that many of us use already. And this is a great example of a side project that's become a thing, right? Like it's become a startup, he's got a co-founder, and probably in Keith's case, he was kind of thinking it might turn out that way. And many startups were side projects. So Uber, StumbleUpon, GitHub, Gravatar, lots of these companies were, in fact, side projects at one point or another. But I don't think you should think about side projects as, I'm going to make something that's going to become something. And then you're back to the pressure and the stress. I think the way to get into it is just to do side projects, knowing it could turn into something. But don't put that pressure on you. Just know it does happen. I asked Keith if he had any advice for the RubyConf crowd on side projects, and he was like, yeah, just don't try to ship a new technology, or try to learn a new technology and ship a side project at the same time, which is good advice. You know, I'm a designer, and we have some of the same afflictions as developers. Many of my early side projects were like, I'm going to do that thing my clients never let me do. Finally, I can play with that new shiny toy. That's cool. That's a perfectly good reason to do a side project. It's just a different type of side project. And I guess it goes to the fact that you want to know your true north. You want to know what it is you're trying to do and get out of this thing. So if it is to learn a new tech, or in my case, experiment with some new awesome design, that's cool. Just do it for that reason. If it's if you want to get better at finishing things, or you want to get better at doing startups, that's also cool. And I think if you're doing it for that reason, probably bog standard Rails or whatever instead of a cutting edge framework is perfectly fine. So you just need to be clear with yourself, what's my true north, because it will help you make your decisions along the way. Another interesting person who does side projects is a guy named Ian Webster, who's like a Google engineer. And he's so into side projects, he writes about them at the end of every year. He's got this blog, ianww.com, where he writes a post this year in side projects at the end of the year. And I just like picked out a few interesting ones that he's been working on. One of them is like an SMS API. It's like I think it's an open source one he's put out, and it just pumps through heaps of stuff. He runs a few servers. Another one he started was like an asteroid database, like a community-driven asteroid database. You can go and pick out asteroids from pictures of the sky. I don't really understand this stuff, I have to tell you. Apparently it was bought by an asteroid mining company, which apparently is a thing. Which is kind of weird as well to me. But it's a great example of doing something in a space you love, and that's something we'll talk about as well. Another interesting example he has is one which he calls the most boring side project in the world, but which I thought was a good example because it's like an inflation calculator. Apparently it didn't take very long to make, but he just uses it as a way to test out ideas about SEO and AdSense, and again, learn and practice some skills that he might need in a startup. And one of Ian's advice tidbits is just about the fact that you need to swallow your pride and get stuff out there. Again, as a designer, I share something that I think a lot of developers have, which is you want something to be really nice and finished before you put it out there. You know, it's like I feel physically unwell when the design is not finished and not complete and not right. And you just need to get past that. It's great as a craftsperson, but when you're interested in getting better at shipping and finishing things and working towards startups, you want to be just really good at getting stuff out there and understand that it's okay. You've got to iterate. You're going to have time to fix it up later, and it'll get better over time. So maybe you're like, okay, great. I'm interested in startups, or I have a passing interest. Tell me more about this side project business. Where do I start? And the first thing you're going to want is an idea, right? And if this was a startup talk, so periodically I do talks about startups, and the thing that I usually would go on about was like, okay, figure out the market size. What's the like total addressable market, and what's the business model? What's the, you know, a whole bunch of startup blah blah crap. Don't worry about that. This is a side project. It doesn't really matter. You can just pretty much ignore all that stuff. If you start doing a bunch of side projects, eventually you can start trying to pitch in some startup conceptions on your side project. But early on, you just need an idea. And it doesn't even need to be a tech idea. I read about this guy, Bemu, who's in Japan, Finnish software developer, and his little side project, which is now like a bit of a business, is that he mails out Japanese candy, which is kind of cool. If you've ever been to Japan, you know going into a supermarket is like a cultural experience in and of itself. There's just so much interesting stuff. So he built a subscription. You pay a subscription, you get candy mailed to you, Candy Japan, if you want to go subscribe. And it's like, you know, there's some tech in it. It's not a tech project, though. So don't limit yourself. Just stick with things that you love. Start with what you love. It's like probably good startup advice generally when you're looking for ideas. It's certainly good side project advice. Probably good life advice, actually. Do something in an area that you love. If you're into cycling, you know, and you're like, oh man, I wish there was like an app that let me share cycling tracks. Cool, go build it. It doesn't even need to be like a serious thing. It can be just for laughs. Mario, who some of you know, has been working on a kebab app, which is like a giant arrow, and it just points to the nearest kebab. Not sure what the tech is in there. It's pretty cool. Apparently it only takes you to the kebab shop at the corner of his street at the moment, but it's a work in progress. Start with what you love, and look for those gaps. So, you know, if you want to listen to that internal dialogue that's like, you know, I wish that something existed to do something. And since it's a side project, you don't need to get too carried away around whether this is the big idea. You can like dial down the pressure, and if you're like, man, I wish there was a way to find kebabs. Awesome, great, go make it. You guys are developers, you're already like leaps ahead of the general population who want to do startups or side projects, because you can actually just go and make a kebab finding app. That's possible. Probably, I don't know, wait to see the app. Channel that frustration that you feel when you see another company doing something and you're like, oh, I could do that better. Channel that frustration and that energy into an idea and put it out there. You know, a great way to think is that if you wanted something and you got it, then you won, right? Like it doesn't, for a startup, you want lots of people to want it and get it, but for a side project, if you wanted it, you built it, you got it, you have won. You needed a kebab, it was Friday night, you built an app, presumably not on Friday night, you got your kebab, you have won, Mario, wherever you are. You are a winner in make it small. So one rule of thumb that I think is good is like for your first cut of your side project, less than 10 hours. Less than 10 hours to get it out. I mean, you know, up to you exactly where you put it, but this is from Sasha Grief, who's a guy who does lots of side projects, and his thinking is, you know, if it is more than 10 hours, if it's like a big thing, it's going to lead to procrastination. And procrastination, you know, if you don't finish things, it's like one of the worst things you can do. Much better to do a smaller thing and get it out the door. It's like Parkinson's law, you know, work fits in the time that you give it. So choose a point in time and pick, all right, well, it's going to be 10 hours, and that's going to drive a lot of constraints, right? Like you'll be like, well, what can I do in 10 hours? If I literally only have 10 hours, where's the value? What is the thing that I can do which will get me out there? And you want to focus down on that core value, right? What is the one thing you can't not do? Mario's app can't not find kebabs. It won't be a kebab finder. but it can not have sign-ups. You don't need a sign-up thing. There's all this stuff when you're making things on the periphery, like sign-up forms, and you've built those things a million times, right? In a startup, you might feel like, okay, well, we're going to have all these things. Let's build all those things. But this is a side project, right? It doesn't actually matter if you keep track of your users. All you want is the value. So it'll teach you to focus right down. If you literally only have 10 hours to ship, you will be forced to think about what is the valuable thing I'm actually trying to make here. And it will force you to focus right down. Remember, you can always iterate. You can always add that stuff later. And this is a great startup skill as well, by the way. So this is one of those skills that you will get more and more practice at, and it'll drive the core value that's going to be in a startup one day. Remember, you've got nothing to lose in a side project. You're not banking your life's future on it. You're not investing lots of money into it. You're not taking money from other people. You're not quitting your job. It's just a side project. If you literally only put 10 hours in, what have you got to lose? You can be a bit more reckless with side projects. You know, as you get more senior in your career, it's very typical to become a bit more conservative. You've seen things go wrong, right? Like you're like, oh man, no, we have to have that thing and that thing and that thing, because I've seen it when kebab finding apps don't find the kebabs. It's bad. You've seen it all go wrong, and you can become a bit more conservative, but now take the awesome experience that you have as a developer and marry it with that sort of youthful experimentalism you had when you first started out, and don't be afraid to take risks, because it's just a side project. It doesn't really matter. You have nothing to lose. But what if it sucks, Collis? What if I launch this thing and it's like, oh man, everyone's like laughing, like this is the stupidest thing. Didn't he know that Apple just came out with a kebab app? What was he thinking, wasting his time on that? We all have this dialogue which is like, oh no, what if I'm embarrassed? But you need to swallow that down and just get it out there. And remember that at the end of the day, nobody will remember. Most people aren't actually even that interested. I have worked on so many side projects that sucked, so many things that were actually kind of embarrassing. I've made one of my early side projects was I made a community for people who played Quake. Like this awesome forum and stuff. Nobody showed up. Turns out there's like more to building a community than placing a forum there. The next thing I did was I made a Photoshop wiki, and I was like, oh yeah, all these people will contribute. It'll be like Wikipedia, but for Photoshop. The only people who showed up were spammers, so unless you wanted the Photoshop techniques of Nigerian princes, it was kind of a useless site. But nobody remembers any of these, except when I mention them at a conference. Most of the time, nobody's even aware that I had all these crappy side projects. They only remember the things at the end which go well. And so you don't need to worry too much. Like, if you make something crap, join the club. We all make crappy things. It actually doesn't even matter. You need to just swallow your pride and know that it is in the doing which is the important thing. It's getting stuff out there, and those things will teach you lessons. Later on, I got to work on a company that built one of the largest communities around, and it was from some of those early lessons and seeing, oh yeah, okay, this little thing for Quake, that didn't work out. It was probably because of this and this and this, and I got to apply those, and that then helps me make the startup better. And that's why you need to go to the gym before you start lifting huge weights. You need to start small and build up, right? Launching. So you want to get it out there. Maybe you've swallowed your pride. You're ready to put it out there. And an early thing I think a lot of people go is like, well, how do I do that? That's not within my skill set. How do I launch this stuff? And I think as you do more side projects, you can work on this more and more. But a very early version is just pick a channel, whatever channel you like. It can be your Twitter feed, your GitHub account, your blog, your email newsletter, whatever it is where people can follow you, and just keep at it. Just keep at that channel, delivering value and useful things around the space you're interested in. You know, if you're scratching your own itches and solving your own problems, chances are you're going to attract other people with those same itches, and they will be following you for value and possibly doctor tips on where to solve this. Get some cream. Scratch your own itch. Solve your own problem. You'll attract more of those people. And those people, if you continue delivering value, continue delivering little side projects, talking about side projects, pushing updates about those things, that's all you need to do. Just think about, how did you hear about BuildKite? You probably follow Keith on Twitter. Maybe you know someone who knows him. You see him around the traps. It doesn't take a lot in those early days. You don't need to know how this stuff plays out, right? Like, you don't need to know how this plays out in full startup marketing, because you're not trying to be there yet. You're just getting started. And getting started, it can just be putting stuff out there for the world to see, and knowing that you're going to put out lots of stuff, and the things that are going to get traction will spread, and the other things, no one will remember them anyways. Don't overthink marketing. If you've done a bunch of side projects and you're getting pretty good at that bit, Then you can start going to some talks about startup marketing, and you'll probably find them even more interesting at that point. And then you can worry about that. But don't overthink it. Just generally, don't overthink this stuff. I think you want to focus instead on seeing it through. I used to be kind of crap at seeing things through, and it's like one of those things that I believe you can practice. It's like a skill you can practice. Like almost anything in life, you can get better at seeing things through. It's very easy to believe that some people have willpower, some people don't. Maybe some people are good at seeing things through, some people aren't. I just don't think that's true. There isn't such a thing as a person who's not able to see things through. There's only people who have chosen things which were too big for them to see through at that time. If you walk out tomorrow and you're like, you know what, I'm going to start running marathons, and you try to run a marathon, maybe you'll fall over after a while. But if you start small and get bigger, build up momentum and get used to that feeling, first side projects, maybe 10 hours, later you do something a bit bigger, later you go, okay, now I'm going to collaborate with a designer as well, now I'm going to do some marketing, you just slowly work up to it, then sure, you've got a much better chance of succeeding, and you're going to have a lot more confidence to see it all the way through. Remember, the big things are going to happen incrementally. It's like such a common piece of advice, it's almost like a cliche that, you know, big things, they don't happen overnight. We all kind of know that, but it just takes reinforcing that people you've seen who have been successful in whatever, startups, or you can pretty much apply this to anything, they have started with small things and they have worked their way up. They have practiced towards that. And it's not about talent either. When I was young, and I think it's a very common misconception when you're young, to think that talent is important. Talent is valuable, it's useful, but it's not the be-all. Talent for me is like where you start on the race. Maybe you have a lot of talent, you start up front. Maybe you don't have that much talent, you start a little bit further behind. But everyone runs the race. Everyone has to run the race, and to run the race, you need guts, and you need perseverance, and you need determination. And that's the thing that will ultimately set you apart. I've seen people who haven't had that much talent who made it really far, and I've seen some very talented people who haven't made it very far. Maybe they shot too big too early, maybe they just didn't have the stamina to see things through. You have to build on that stuff. Start small, start with some side projects, and know that you need those crappy ones to get better. I know a guy who started a side project. It was a cool little tool that he built, but he misspelled everything on the site. It was just like kind of embarrassing how bad his copy was. So the next side project, he got a copywriter involved. And he was like, okay, obviously that's something that I need to work on. People were commenting on it. Maybe the things you think are important are not that important, but how will you know until you start? The more you do this stuff, the more startup muscle you build doing side projects, the easier things will get. As you start to try out different ideas, you'll find new ideas come to you more easily. You'll start spotting things. You'll be looking for gaps. It'll become more intuitive. Intuition isn't something people are born with. Intuition is something you build up through experience. As you've been doing more idea searching, it'll just be more natural to you. As you become better at seeing things through, you'll get it better at seeing bigger things through. The internet's full of people telling you how to do something, right? I've just stood here for half an hour telling you how to do this stuff. At the end of the day, really, there isn't any formula. There's no magic trick. There's just doing it. You're here at this Ruby conference, which is going to expose you to lots of interesting people, lots of interesting ideas. It's a great time to be thinking about things, looking for ideas, being open to inspiration. And my challenge to you while you're here for these 2 days is to look out for an idea, choose an idea, commit to it, and then focus on doing it rather than thinking about it. Just focus on getting out there. Tell people you're going to work on this thing, and then get it done. If 10 hours is too big for a constraint for you, maybe it's 5 hours. Choose a 5-hour thing. If 5 hours is too big, heck, choose 2 hours. While I was making this presentation, I was like, I should build like a Slack community for people interested in side projects. I bet I could do that in 2 hours. Maybe you can extract some code out of something you've already worked on. Maybe you can write a blog post. It's like those writers who are like, I'm just going to write one headline. Because they know when they write a headline, they'll write a sentence. When they write a sentence, they'll write a paragraph. When they write a paragraph, they'll write a whole page. This stuff will start to come once you get into it. You just need to start. So choose an idea, get out there, do it. And remember, great things happen when you're in the arena, not when you're watching from the stands. I'm looking forward to seeing all the side projects that come out of this conference, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Collis.